Hello everybody, and welcome back to Learning to Draw with Andrew Loomis' Fun with a Pencil. I'm Illustrator John McCoy, based in Cincinnati, Ohio, and today we are beginning on page 108, and we are learning about light and shadow. My whole life I've drawn from life, and I admit that it's been difficult to find a theory behind all of this. How do we know how long a shadow is? We can understand basic principles just by looking at the way objects behave. Look at my hand. I know, and you guys now know, that there is a light source, a ring light around my camera. And that is basically creating these lines that touch the edge of my fingers and cast down and create this shadow. It's a cone of light rays coming down from this and creating shadows on the page, so that the further my hand is from the page, the larger the shadows get. Why? Because these lines are diminishing into that point of light that is around the camera. So we can understand things just by looking at them, but the reality is that nature is more complex than we think about, especially in terms of sunlight, because the celestial bodies, the one that we're standing on, the Earth sitting on, the Earth is incredibly big, and the sun is even bigger, and the distances are even bigger. But we need to put things into a theory. So we draw this line, and we learn the importance of the most direct source of light. So the sun is pretty easy to understand. It's a ball of incredibly hot energy that is radiating rays of light out in literally every direction. So you can see that he's drawn this as these rays are going out in every direction. But the thing is when we're talking about, everything's contextual when we're drawing something, especially in perspective and in this case light and shadow as well. The ground itself is the Earth, which means that there is a ray of light that is the most direct, the one that is closest to the Earth. And in every situation, depending on where you are on the Earth, this changes. But to follow what he's drawing here, we're going to follow this as best as we can just by focusing. This one is first necessary to understand what's going on here, but this is from space and this is brought down to Earth. So let's draw what he's drawn as best we can. Why? Because the more we draw it like what he's drawn, the more that's going to sink into our mind, and it's going to help us understand how this theory works. We have the Earth. We cut the Earth into these lines that are perfectly vertical through the middle point and perfectly horizontal. This perfectly horizontal line becomes the most direct line, or is part of the most direct line to the source, which is in this case the sun. We'll draw these rays going out in every direction to represent that fact that these light rays are going out in every direction. But like I said, and we're thinking three-dimensionally, of course, which is why this DL, which is the direction of light, is not hitting the edge here, because this is a three-dimensional drawing. It could hit this edge, but then that wouldn't serve our purposes of analyzing where the shadows fall from this sign, which we're trying to understand. So he has the DL right here. This is the direction of the light, meaning that we have one ray of sunlight which is most directly hitting the Earth. And in our imaginary drawing here, this is the source, and this is that most direct ray of sunlight hitting the Earth right here. Notice how these lines that we're using to intersect the edge of the bottom of the sign are curved, because we're working with a curved surface, which is the Earth. Let's try to replicate that little sign as best as possible. First of all, confidently draw this sphere as best as possible. It's very difficult to do with ink. You're not alone if you have some difficulty with that. But for the sake of our understanding in drawing this as a diagram to help it sink into our brains, how does this theory work? Let's start this way. So we can draw those lines. Supposing that this is bisecting this perfect sphere, like so. Now let's draw that little sign he talked about. Let's do it in pencil first to gain our confidence. Right about here is the bottom of that sign where it touches the earth. And we can use the center of this point as a way of understanding the perspective of this sign. So now that we've got that established, we can draw that little sign. And we can draw the top of the sign here. And then the bottom of the sign right here. So now, this is where we take this from the direction of light, which is, like I said, the ray of sun that is the shortest distance, that is the most direct focus of light on the surface of the earth in this diagram, which is the DL. And then we take these lines, and we might want to use pencil for develop our drawing first before we put it in pen. These lines will curve. Why? Because the earth is a curved surface. And he's even drawn a line that goes all the way through. This line could continue this way, but we're not going to draw that. This is for the sake of understanding it. So now we draw from this DL radiating lines that go to the edge of the bottom two posts of the sign and carry through. And they should get larger. Why? Because this is a small point expanding out to touch the two sides of the sign. So what we end up with is these lines of the shadows that continue in this direction behind the sign. Now, what I've always wondered, and maybe you wondered too, is how long does the shadow? How is that determined? And it's very simple. We take from the center of our light source and we draw a line that intersects the very top of the sign through here. So the closer you can understand this in theory, when the sun sets in the earth and it hits the horizon, the lines of shadow become longer and longer, because look at the way this diagram works. If this sign is further back here, away from the sun or more on the edge of the earth, the shadows are going to become even longer and longer. If this sign, even easier to understand, is if we put the sign in the path of the most direct source of light, which would be this hemisphere of the earth would be experiencing broad daylight, like the midday sun, the shadows are going to fall directly underneath the objects. So that's cool. That's cool to understand that as far as in terms of the earth. That concept, which we can access by studying this page, thanks to Andrew Loomis's diagrams and so forth, which is very cool. I've learned a lot from that, and I hope you guys have too. But back to what we were saying, is that we took a line directly from the center of the light source and intersected it with the top of the sign, which landed us right about here for where that shadow terminates. We're following the curve, and we terminate that line right here. And that's how we understand how long those shadows are. The same thing is literally happening at the bottom, where you can see that the light is able to pass through this sign because the sign has a space right here. So from the center of the light source to the bottom of that sign, we get the point in which you can see that the light was able to pass through the empty space on the bottom of the sign. And shading it in will make it even more concrete. If you guys have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I hope I'm explaining this as clear as possible. I would say in the end of this Andrew Loomis book that some of these concepts, like the concept of perspective and the concept of shadows and light, are so complicated. They're simple, but yet they're complicated in terms of, maybe for some of you this is clicking super fast. But in my sense right here, the way I've read these pages and stuff, I had to read them over a couple times, because once you get it, and it's like, wow, that's so simple. It's so simple. These angles, they all make sense. This creates a triangle. This, as he said, is AL, which is angle of light. Very simple, AL. This creates a triangle. These lines are coming directly from the source of the sun, casting these shadows, and now we understand why shadows are the length they are. Why are they not shorter? Why are they longer? Depending on which is the most direct source of light. That makes sense. Because why? Because look at the ring light around my camera. When I hold my hand above the page, you can see that this is directly, the shadow is directly under my hand. Because if the light source was coming from another side, if for instance I turned off this ring light, and now you see the light coming from the window, it's casting the shadow at this angle. So this is what's happening here, put into practice. That the light source is coming from up there in the window, and when I put this pen on the paper, the same theory is happening. These shadows are longer because the light is coming more from that angle. So the angle of the light, like we said, determines how long the shadows will be. So let's turn that back on. This is basically, you can draw this if you want, but basically the same principle is happening. It's just that the source of light is off of our picture plane here, so we can't really see it. But the same thing is happening, and if you want to make that clear, let's go ahead, jump in, do this diagram very quickly. Same deal. This case we've got the horizon, right, like this. And this same diagram is being brought down to earth, as he says here. So we have that DL still here, which is situated perfectly on our little horizon right there. The DL is the perpendicular to the light source. So that goes up, off and off and off, really far, high up. The sun's up somewhere, and that creates our angle of light. And so when we understand, now when we're drawing the sign, we're considering that this horizon line has points of perspective. So we'll try to keep that in mind by copying what he's drawn here. We've blocked in the sign. What might help you is we're kind of falling back towards the lessons of perspective that we learned earlier in this series, which is great. So all lines above the horizon line are going to angle more downward, and these lines are going to angle more upward. But anyways, that's that theory put into practice, again, reiterated on this page. But let's just say here's another sign. Okay, we've got the sign drawn here, and these posts that hold the sign up, but the sign is above, like there. And we have this sign here. So basically the same principle happening in diagram A. And ask me if you have any questions. Put in the comments what is a doubt you may have about this theory and how does this work. Or if you need me to explain it a little better, maybe I'm able to do that. Maybe I have the opportunity to do that. But the same thing is happening. These lines coming from the DL, the direction of light, intersecting the lags of the sign, like so. We're putting a slight curve to them because the Earth still does curve a little bit, just for fun. They create these lines, and then we ask ourselves, how far does the shadow go back? Well, let's just say if the shadow, for copying his drawing, and the shadow terminates right here, we have a slightly different vanishing point than he does. But the thing is if this terminates here, that creates a rule that this direction of light is a perpendicular, perfectly vertical line from the horizon, perpendicular to the horizon, that goes up to here. And then we have something else that's happening, and I'll just use the jacket of his book, is that the angle of light, if the shadow really terminates here, that means this line must go through the corner of the sign and intersect with our vertical line, which is literally right in the middle of the John McCoy art logo. How interesting is that? Okay, but that's the theory behind it. And it can be tested by the fact that if we drew that source of light, so if it's in the middle of the John McCoy art logo, then if that's the center of the source of light, that means that when we want to find out where does this space of open air that allows light to put a light patch on the ground here to let light through underneath the shadow or underneath the sign, there's going to be a patch of shadow like seen here in this diagram. Then we can use the center of the logo, which is the source of light like we were talking about, and intersect those corners and fall where they fall on the ground. Same thing happening here. So there we have it. We've established, and we're following our perspective, which is a little different than his. But there we go. We've established those angles, and you can see how the light was permitted to pass behind the sign. So let's just shade this in for fun to help us really grasp the concept. But let's first draw in our DL. The source is up here, and we have the AL, which is the angle of light. We can draw in some lines going up towards the source to show how that theory is working and put into practice. And now the fun part, let's just shade in our sign so that you're able to see. The back of the sign would be in shadow because it's not facing the light source. But then you can see the overall drawing, because seeing is believing in a way. Once we see it, we can understand, well, this makes 100%, this makes a lot of sense. This whole theory makes sense, and we were able to draw a scene that makes sense by shading in our areas of shadow and making that drawing come to life. We can understand. The thing that really was amazing to me is understanding why that the direction of light, which is the most direct ray of light coming from the sun, was important to understanding the angle of the light, was important to understanding the angle of the shadow, the way these curved out and went back to that one source. Because shadow, if you look in nature, that does actually happen. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video on light and shadow, and I look forward to seeing you in the next part of this series. We're about to wrap up this series. It's been a lot of fun. If you guys have any questions at all, please let me know in the comments. If there's anything I should go over, try to help you understand, or talk about theory a little more that might be able to help, just let me know in the comments. I'm so glad you could join me today watching this video. And until next time, God bless you.